Rain had begun its quiet reign over the village of Ashcombe when Clara Whitby stepped from her father's modest vicarage, her small valise clasped tightly in her gloved hand. The cobbled lane glistened like tarnished glass beneath the lanterns, and the air trembled with the sound of murmured gossip carried on the wind. Behind lace curtains, the parish ladies whispered that the vicar's daughter was trading piety for pride, venturing into the Duke of Ravenshire's house as though charity might lift her above her place. Clara heard them but did not falter. She had learned, through years of service and silence, that kindness often looked like defiance to those who feared the mirror of it. Her bonnet shielded her from the drizzle, yet not from the ache of departure. The carriage waited by the churchyard gate, its black frame gleaming faintly beneath the gaslight. Her father's hand lingered on hers, a quiet blessing without words. "Do good where you can, my dear," he murmured. "Even among those who have forgotten what goodness looks like." Clara smiled faintly, then stepped inside. As the driver urged the horses forward, she looked back only once, at the church spire piercing the low clouds like a prayer half swallowed by heaven. Hours later, the world around her had transformed into a blur of moorland and fog. The Duke's estate, spoken of in both reverence and fear, lay beyond the heath, a house the villagers called Blackthorn Hall. Its gates, wrought of iron and age, opened with a groan that seemed to awaken something ancient within their hinges. The carriage rolled through a tunnel of yew trees, their branches stooping low as if to hide her from what waited ahead. When at last the manor came into view, Clara's breath caught. The house was vast, its windows dim, its stone walls veiled in climbing ivy. A place once alive with laughter, now only the echo of it remained. The servants who received her moved like shadows, their voices hushed, their faces pale as if the gloom of the estate had seeped into their bones. "You are expected," said a gray-haired butler with a measured bow. "The Duchess awaits you in her chamber. The Duke seldom receives visitors." The corridors smelled faintly of rosewater and dust. Paintings of stern ancestors followed her with their painted eyes, each portrait seeming to weigh her worth as she passed. When she entered the Duchess's room, the air shifted. The old woman lay upon a great four-poster bed draped in velvet, her silver hair arranged neatly against her pillow. Yet even through frailty, there lingered a trace of regal strength in her gaze. "So, you are the vicar's daughter," the Duchess said softly, studying Clara as though she were a memory trying to return. "They say you have healing hands." "I have patient ones, Your Grace," Clara replied, folding her hands neatly before her. "And a willing heart." The Duchess's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something gentler. "That will do." From that first day, Clara tended to her with quiet diligence. She read aloud by candlelight, prepared tinctures of lavender and chamomile, and walked with her when the weather allowed. The Duchess spoke of her gardens, once famed throughout the county for their pale roses. She spoke also of her son, the Duke, Lord Edmund Harrow, though only in sighs and half-phrases, as if his name were both pride and sorrow. It was several days before Clara saw him. She had risen in the night to fetch water when the sound of slow footsteps reached her from the hall. A tall figure moved past the candlelight, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark attire. His face, when revealed by the flicker of the flame, was stern and striking, marked by the gravity of long solitude. "You must be Miss Whitby," he said, his voice low and even. "My mother tells me she is well attended." Clara curtsied. "Your Grace. I am glad she finds comfort." He regarded her for a moment, unreadable, then said, "Do not mistake this house for a place of ease. My mother's illness is old as grief itself. We live quietly here." "I prefer quiet, my lord," she answered, meeting his gaze with calm steadiness. He inclined his head slightly. "Then you shall find plenty of it." With that, he turned and disappeared into the corridor, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the vast silence. Days passed. The rhythm of the household settled like a slow tide, steady, melancholic. Clara learned the small customs of the manor. The servants never spoke above a whisper, no fires were lit in the west wing, and the Duke dined alone, long after the others had retired. The Duchess's condition wavered between lucidity and sleep, yet she grew fond of Clara, asking her to sit beside the bed and speak of her life in the village. "You remind me," she once said, "of the women this house forgot, those who gave warmth without expecting applause." One evening, as a storm gathered outside, the Duchess drifted into uneasy slumber. Clara stayed by her side, the only light a single candle trembling on the nightstand. Rain tapped against the windows in soft fury. The door creaked open. The Duke stood there, his coat damp, his expression carved from marble. "I trust she rests." "She does, my lord, though her dreams trouble her." "She dreams of the past," he said quietly, crossing the room. His eyes, gray as storm water, lingered on his mother's frail form. "There are some memories too heavy to put to sleep." Clara hesitated, then spoke gently. "Yet memories, when shared, grow lighter." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for a fleeting instant, his guarded composure faltered. "You speak as though you know sorrow." "I have seen it in others," she replied. "And sometimes that is enough." He gave a short nod, the faintest ghost of acknowledgment, and turned away. But as he reached the door, he paused. "Do not tire yourself, Miss Whitby. Blackthorn has a way of wearing down the living." When he was gone, the candle guttered in the draught, and the house seemed to sigh. Clara returned to her post by the bedside, her thoughts unsettled. There was something about the Duke's loneliness that pressed against her heart. Not pity, not admiration, but recognition, as if two distant melodies had briefly found the same key. Later that night, unable to sleep, she went to the small window of her attic chamber. Below, the gardens stretched in silver mist. The roses, untended for years, drooped like pale ghosts in the moonlight. And there, walking alone among them, was the Duke. His figure moved slowly between the withered vines, head bowed, hands clasped behind his back, a man burdened by the weight of his own silence. The wind carried the faint toll of a church bell from far beyond the hills, and Clara watched as he stopped before a crumbling marble bench. He stood motionless, then knelt, as though before a grave. A flicker of lightning lit the sky, revealing his face, haunted, unguarded. In that moment, Clara understood what the villagers could not. The Duke was not cruel. He was simply a man who had forgotten how to be alive. And though she did not yet know why fate had brought her to that lonely house, she felt, with quiet certainty, that her purpose there was greater than healing an old woman's frail body. As the candle dimmed and the storm rolled over the moors, the manor slept beneath its shroud of rain. Only Clara remained awake, her heart steady, her gaze fixed upon the figure below. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for him. For the house. For whatever wound the night refused to close. The first days of spring arrived timidly at Blackthorn Hall, the frost retreating from the earth like a defeated army. Clara had begun rising before dawn to open the shutters of the Duchess's chamber, letting the pale light seep in, soft and golden. The old woman's health had strengthened in quiet measure, and her laughter, fragile as birdsong, sometimes echoed through the corridor. It was during one such morning that the Duke appeared unannounced, his presence filling the doorway. Clara stood by the window, her hands clasped, sunlight catching the edge of her hair. "My mother says you have revived her roses," he said, his tone neither accusatory nor kind, merely factual, as if unsure which feeling to permit. Clara lowered her eyes. "They were only sleeping, my lord. They needed trimming and care, nothing more." "Those gardens belong to my wife," he said after a pause, his gaze drifting to the window. "They should have been left as they were." "I meant no offense," she murmured. "Only life." He said nothing more, but that night, when Clara returned to her small room, she found a book resting on her table, a collection of poetry bound in worn leather. There was no note, only a pressed white rose between its pages. She knew at once from whose hand it came, though she dared not speak of it. Days lengthened into weeks. The manor stirred, almost imperceptibly, from its long sleep. Music began to play faintly from the distant drawing-room, and the Duchess requested tea in the conservatory. Clara guided her there one afternoon, and for the first time saw sunlight spill freely through the tall glass windows. It danced upon the floor, upon the silver of the Duchess's hair, and upon the Duke himself, who entered moments later in conversation with a visiting gentleman. The guests were neighbors, Lord and Lady Pembroke, wealthy, well-dressed, and full of the self-satisfaction that often accompanies both. Clara lingered quietly at the edge of the room, arranging teacups, when Lady Pembroke addressed her as though to a peer. "My dear, you have the prettiest hands. Tell me, are you recently come from Bath?" Before Clara could answer, Lord Pembroke smiled politely. "My wife mistakes you, Mississippi. Are you a guest of the Duchess?" Lady Pembroke's eyes sharpened as realization dawned. "Oh, she is the nurse." Her tone sliced through the air, delicate but cruel. "How modern of you, Ravensshire, to allow the help at tea." A hush fell. Clara froze, her cheeks burning, but before she could retreat, the Duke's voice cut through the silence, low and measured. "In this house, Lady Pembroke, dignity is not measured by birth. Miss Whitby is here at my invitation." The lady faltered, her smile brittle. The room exhaled. The Duchess's teacup rattled faintly in its saucer, and Clara, swallowing her shame, resumed her quiet service. When the guests departed, the Duke did not meet her gaze. Yet later that evening, a servant delivered a single white rose to her chamber. The incident left a tremor in the air. Servants began to whisper. They fell silent when Clara passed. She bore it with calm resolve, focusing her energy upon the Duchess, who seemed more alert, more spirited. The old woman, sensing unspoken tensions, took Clara's hand one night and said softly, "My son was not always made of stone. Once," he laughed, "once, he believed the world had mercy in it." "And what changed him, Your Grace?" Clara asked gently. "The loss of his wife, Eleanor," came the answer, faint as breath. "He blames himself. For everything." The storm outside deepened as the Duchess drifted into sleep. Clara sat for a long while by the window, the firelight flickering upon her thoughtful face. She had seen grief before in others, but the Duke's grief was not a wound, it was a fortress. One evening, unable to rest, Clara wandered the hall and heard faint music from beyond the library doors. The melody, halting, mournful, was played upon a piano. She pushed the door slightly open and found the Duke there alone, his hands poised above the keys. The room glowed amber from the fire, shadows curling along the shelves. He looked up, startled, but did not rebuke her. "Do you know this piece?" Clara stepped nearer. "It's Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata. My mother played it." He nodded faintly. "Eleanor loved it. I have not touched this instrument since she died. Yet tonight—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Forgive me. You need not hear the confessions of a broken man." She shook her head. "It is no sin to remember." His eyes met hers, heavy with years unspoken. "You think remembrance is noble, Miss Whitby. I find it cruel. Each note reminds me of what I forbid her to do. She longed to ride that morning. I told her the ground was too wet. She went anyway. The horse fell." His voice cracked, the words barely escaping. "I buried her beneath the rose arbor she planted." Silence filled the room, thick and intimate. Clara, moved by compassion more than courage, said quietly, "Perhaps she forgave you long before you did." He turned from her, covering his face with a trembling hand. For the first time, the iron of his composure broke. Clara did not touch him, but her presence seemed to steady the air. "Your mother needs you," she whispered, "and this house needs you still." When he finally looked back at her, there was gratitude hidden behind exhaustion. "You are unlike anyone I have met within these walls." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps it is because I have walked beyond them." After that night, something shifted. The Duke spoke more to her, not as master to servant, but as one human to another. Their conversations were brief, formal, yet alive with the fragile pulse of understanding. When Clara passed through the hall, his gaze would find her, lingering just a moment longer than propriety allowed. The Duchess noticed, though she said nothing. The servants noticed too, and they did not keep silent. By the week's end, Clara felt the weight of eyes upon her wherever she went. Whispers floated behind her steps. When she entered the breakfast room, talk ceased. The household, once merely silent, had grown watchful. Then, one afternoon, as she gathered the Duchess's medicine, a letter arrived from London. The seal bore the raven's higher crest. The butler handed it to the Duke in the hall, his face pale. "It seems, my lord, that certain circles have begun to speak of your nurse." The Duke read the letter, then dismissed the man. His expression darkened, though not with anger at her, but at the world. "You see, Miss Whitby," he said bitterly, "the higher one's title, the smaller one's freedom." "I have done nothing to shame you, my lord," she answered steadily. "I know," he said, his tone low. "But truth is often less powerful than rumor." The conversation ended there, yet that night, as Clara tended the Duchess, she heard faint footsteps pause outside the door. His footsteps, and then retreat. He no longer visited, but she felt his absence like a silence that had shape and weight. Weeks passed. The garden bloomed again, pale roses swaying in the wind. Clara watched them from her window and wondered whether beauty could survive such scrutiny. When the moon rose that night, she saw the Duke once more in the garden, alone as always. But this time, he looked up toward her window, as though he knew she was watching. Their eyes met across the distance, a silent vow neither dared to speak. Somewhere within the house, a clock struck midnight. Clara closed her shutters, her heart unsteady. She did not yet know what was to come, only that the quiet between them had changed forever. The following weeks unfolded like the hush before confession, tense, waiting, fragile. The air in Blackthorn Hall carried a strange stillness, as though the house itself had become aware of its own scandal. Servants spoke in coded glances, conversations ceased when footsteps approached, and Clara felt the subtle withdrawal of every courtesy once afforded her. The Duchess noticed, of course, for nothing escaped the eyes of age. One morning, as Clara arranged fresh roses upon the table, the old woman said softly, "When the heart begins to heal, child, it often offends those who preferred it broken." Clara looked up, startled. "I would never seek to bring warmth to a cold house." The Duchess smiled faintly. "My son has lived too long in winter. Do not apologize for the spring." That same afternoon, the Duke sent for Clara. She entered his study with the poise of someone determined not to tremble. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, the sunlight tracing the edge of his jaw. Papers lay scattered across the desk, letters, sealed and unsealed, heavy with consequence. "There has been talk," he said without preamble. "Letters have reached London. Some suggest impropriety between myself and my mother's nurse." Clara met his gaze steadily. "And what do you believe, my lord?" He hesitated, as though the truth itself required courage. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the world invents sin wherever it cannot comprehend kindness." The words lingered between them, too honest for comfort. He turned away, struggling between duty and desire. "For your sake, Miss Whitby, it may be best that you depart once my mother has recovered. The rumors will fade sooner if distance confirms their falsehood." Her breath caught. "Is that truly your wish?" "No," he admitted, barely above a whisper. "But it may be the only choice left to us." Clara curtsied, though her composure wavered. "Then I shall stay until her grace no longer requires me." As she left the room, she caught her reflection in the mirror, poised, pale, resolute. Yet beneath the calm surface, her heart felt like glass pressed to breaking. That night, unable to rest, she descended quietly to the conservatory. The moonlight spilled through the glass roof, silvering the roses she had revived with her own hands. She knelt to touch one bloom, its petals soft as sighs. "Do not fade yet," she whispered. "Not when you have only just begun again." Behind her, footsteps echoed faintly. She turned and found the Duke watching her from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his voice, when he spoke, was stripped of pretense. "I told myself I would let you go without protest. Yet here I am, unable to leave this room." Clara rose slowly. "Why say this, if it cannot change what must be?" "Because silence has punished me long enough," he said. "I have buried truth beside the woman I lost, and it has made me less than a man. When I see you, I remember what it is to feel without shame." Her heart trembled under the weight of his confession. "And yet, my lord, the world would not forgive such feeling." He stepped closer, each pace measured, his voice low and steady. "Let it condemn me, then. I am tired of living by the mercy of whispers." The air between them grew still, their reflections mingling in the glass. "You deserve peace," she said softly. "Not ruin on my account." He looked at her then, the mask of nobility stripped away. "Peace is nothing without meaning. And meaning, Miss Whitby, I have only found in your presence." It was not a declaration made for the world. It was the quiet surrender of a man who had fought too long against his own heart. Clara could not speak. Her breath trembled, her resolve crumbled. And yet, she did not step away when he reached for her hand. The touch was brief, reverent, more vow than gesture. Then, as if the moment itself feared discovery, the Duchess's voice called faintly from the corridor. They parted instantly. When the Duke left, his expression carried both regret and resolve. The next morning, the estate stirred with rumor once more. Lady Pembroke had returned, uninvited, under the guise of concern for the Duchess. She arrived in a gleaming carriage, her smile sharp as crystal. "My dear Duchess," she cooed, "how wonderful to see you revived. And what a devoted companion you have in your nurse." The Duchess's eyes, clear and knowing, met Clara's briefly before turning to their guest. "Indeed," she said coolly. "Devotion seems a rare virtue among our rank, does it not?" Lady Pembroke blinked, her composure slipping. "Oh, quite. Though I must confess, the county has taken great interest in your household. One hears the most fascinating tales." "Then I suggest they find better storytellers," came another voice. The Duke entered, tall and unyielding, his presence commanding the room. "Lady Pembroke, I will not tolerate slander disguised as concern. You will leave my home, or I shall ensure every door in London remembers your cruelty before your charm." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Pembroke, flushing, rose swiftly and swept from the room. The Duchess hid a smile behind her teacup. When the door closed, the Duke turned to Clara. For a moment his eyes softened, but he said nothing. Later, however, a sealed envelope appeared upon her writing desk. Inside lay a single note: "The world may chain me to its judgment, but it cannot dictate the truth I hold." The days that followed were brief and heavy with unspoken understanding. The Duchess's health improved enough that she insisted Clara walk with her in the gardens. "You have done what physicians could not," she said one afternoon. "You have restored life, not only to me, but to my son." "I fear I have restored trouble as well," Clara replied quietly. The Duchess smiled faintly. "Trouble is simply what love looks like before it is forgiven." That evening, the Duke summoned Clara once more to the conservatory. Rain streaked down the glass, thunder murmured across the hills. He stood beside the roses, their pale petals trembling in the wind. "My mother tells me you mean to leave tomorrow," he said. "She no longer needs me," Clara answered softly, "and the house will rest easier without the weight of my presence." "Then let it be uneasy," he said, "for I will not watch it fall silent again." She shook her head. "You have your title, your estate, your duty. I have only my name, and that name would not survive your affection." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with every word left unsaid. "Then keep your name," he murmured, "and let me keep my truth. I would rather live scorned for loving you than honored for forgetting." Tears welled in her eyes, though she smiled through them. "Then, my lord, remember me kindly." He took her hand once more, but this time he pressed something into it, a locket of silver, engraved with the Ravensshire crest. "For as long as this house stands," he said, "its roses will bloom because of you." The storm deepened outside, wind howling through the eaves. When dawn broke, the carriage waited by the gate. The Duchess embraced her warmly, whispering, "He will not forget. Men like him never do." Clara looked once more at the manor, its windows glimmering faintly in the morning mist, and saw, through the high arch of the conservatory, the Duke standing alone among the roses, one hand lifted in quiet farewell. The carriage rolled forward, the road vanishing into fog. Yet as Blackthorn Hall faded from view, Clara touched the locket at her throat and felt, not loss, but something softer, like the echo of music still playing after the last note. The story of the Duke and the Vicar's daughter would not be written in ledgers or whispered in drawing rooms, but in the quiet resurrection of two hearts that had dared, if only once, to defy the silence.